The mocking laughter echoed across the private shooting range as 70-year-old Frank carefully unpacked his worn ammunition box. A younger competitor sneered, pointing at Frank's hand-loaded rounds. "You're shooting that grudge junk at a precision match? Save yourself the embarrassment, old man. This is a $500 a box competition." Frank said nothing. His sad, serious eyes focused on his equipment. His red jacket faded from years of wear over a plain white t-shirt, his white beard catching the morning light. The others continued loading their premium factory ammunition, imported match-grade rounds that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. Frank's hands, weathered and steady, continued their practiced routine. Type respect if you believe skill matters more than money. Frank had been reloading ammunition for 52 years, ever since his days as a Marine Corps marksmanship instructor at Camp Pendleton. Back then, he had trained snipers, refined techniques, understood ballistics at a level most shooters never reached. He knew powder charges down to the 10th of a grain, understood how temperature affected velocity, could read wind patterns that others missed entirely. But that was decades ago. Now he lived alone in a small house on the edge of town, his wife gone 3 years, his military pension covering the basics and little more. His reloading bench in the garage was his sanctuary, where he still crafted ammunition with the same precision he had taught young Marines. Each round was measured, weighed, inspected, each primer seated with exactly the right amount of pressure, each bullet seated to the precise depth that his decades of experience had proven optimal. He used components that were good but not extravagant. Surplus powder he bought in bulk, bullets he cast himself sometimes, or bought on sale. Brass he had been using and reusing for years, each case annealed and inspected. His $12 a box cost was generous. Most boxes cost him less than $8 to produce. The private range was hosting its annual Precision Rifle Challenge, a competition that attracted wealthy shooters from across 3 states. Entry fee was $200. Most competitors arrived in trucks that cost more than Frank's house. They carried custom rifles worth $5,000 to $10,000, topped with optics that cost as much as used cars. They wore expensive shooting jackets, used electronic wind meters, brought spotting scopes that could read bullet holes at 1,000 yards. Frank had driven up in his 1998 pickup, rust spots visible on the fenders, carrying a rifle he had built himself 40 years ago on a surplus military action. His scope was older than most of the competitors. His shooting mat was a folded blanket. The range officer had looked at his entry form twice, surprised that someone from outside the usual wealthy circle had registered. The other shooters had noticed Frank immediately, his age, his worn clothing, his ancient equipment. They had exchanged glances, smirks. One had loudly wondered if this was some kind of charity case. Another had suggested maybe Frank was lost, looking for the public range down the highway. The format was straightforward. 5 shooters per relay, 5 shots at 600 yards. Best group wins the relay. Winners advanced to the finals at 800 yards. First place took home $5,000 and a custom rifle. But more than that, it earned respect in a community that prided itself on precision and exclusivity. Frank was assigned to the 3rd relay. The first 2 relays had been dominated by predictable names, wealthy men who competed regularly, who knew each other, who formed an informal club within the shooting sports world. Their groups had been impressive. One had shot a group measuring just under 3 inches at 600 yards. Another had managed 2.7 inches. The crowd had applauded, thousands of dollars in ammunition and equipment, performing exactly as advertised. When Frank's relay was called, he moved slowly to the firing line. His back was stiff. His knees protested. He arranged his blanket, settled into position with the careful movements of someone whose body remembered the positions even as it complained about them. The shooter next to him, a man in his 40s wearing a custom shooting jacket with sponsor patches, glanced over. "That's a nice antique. Does it still fire?" Frank's expression never changed. "It does." The man smirked. "Well, good luck with your homemade bullets. I'm shooting the new Hornady ELD match, $120 a box, tested in a lab, ballistic coefficient 0.75. Frank simply nodded. The relay began. The first shooter, the man with the expensive Hornady ammunition, fired his 5 shots with practiced rhythm. His spotter called adjustments. His shooting was technically sound. When the target was retrieved, his group measured 3.1 inches. Respectable. The crowd murmured approval. The second shooter, using custom-loaded ammunition from a prestigious company, that charged $400 for 20 rounds fired carefully. His group came back at 2.9 inches, slightly better, polite applause. The third shooter rushed slightly, his group opening up to 4 inches. Disappointed headshakes. The fourth shooter, extremely wealthy and shooting ammunition that cost $600 a box imported from Europe and advertised as the finest precision rounds available, took his time. His group measured 2.8 inches, the best so far. Confident smiles from his friends. Then it was Frank's turn. He loaded one of his hand-loaded rounds, the brass case showing wear but perfectly maintained, the bullets seated with precision born from thousands of hours of practice. He settled behind the rifle, his breathing slowing, his body remembering routines trained into muscle memory half a century ago. He fired. The recoil was familiar, comfortable. He cycled the bolt, loaded the second round, fired, third round, fourth, fifth. His rhythm was unhurried but consistent. No spotter calling corrections, no electronic devices, just an old man and a rifle and ammunition he had crafted in his garage. When the target was retrieved, the range officer was silent for a long moment. Then his voice came over the radio, uncertain. Relay 3, shooter 5. Group measures 1.4 inches. The crowd went quiet. The shooter with the expensive European ammunition turned to look at Frank. 1.4, the range officer confirmed. 1.4 inches, all 5 shots. The group was nearly half the size of the next best competitor. Frank slowly stood, his expression unchanged, sad and serious as always, and walked back from the firing line. The other competitors stared. The man who had mocked his ammunition was looking at Frank's worn ammo box like it contained some kind of secret. "How did you do that?" Frank's voice was quiet. "Practice." The man shook his head. "No, I mean, what load are you shooting? What powder? What bullet?" Frank began packing his equipment. Just a standard load, nothing special. But the man persisted. "That's not possible. Those are hand loads, gauge ammunition. You just outshot military-grade match ammo." Frank paused, meeting the man's eyes for the first time. "I know what military-grade means. I wrote some of the manuals. The finals were 2 hours later, 800 yards, the best shooters from each relay, plus the 2 highest scores overall." Frank had qualified easily. The others in the finals were the elite of the competition, men who had won before, whose names were known in precision shooting circles. They gathered at the firing line with renewed focus. The old man's performance had been surprising, but 800 yards was different. Longer range meant more variables. Wind, temperature, the subtle imperfections in ammunition would be magnified. Surely the expensive factory ammunition, developed in laboratories and tested extensively, would prove superior. Surely the old man's luck would run out. The finals began. The groups were larger now, as expected. The first shooter managed 5.2 inches, the second 4.8, the third 6.1, his concentration broken perhaps by the pressure. The fourth shooter, using the $600 European ammunition, fired carefully and achieved 4.3 inches, the best so far. The crowd was larger now, word having spread about the old man in the red jacket who had shot the impossible group in the preliminaries. When Frank took his position, there was genuine curiosity. He went through the same routine, the same careful, unhurried rhythm, 5 shots, no drama. No visible strain, just steady, practiced shooting. When his target came back, the range officer's voice was different this time, respectful. Relay finals, shooter 5, group measures 2.1 inches. The crowd erupted, 2.1 inches at 800 yards with hand-loaded ammunition that cost $12 a box. It was half the size of the next best group. It was the kind of precision that professionals dreamed about, that equipment manufacturers advertised but rarely delivered. Frank had just demonstrated that skill, experience and knowledge mattered more than money. The other competitors gathered around him now, their mockery replaced by genuine curiosity and growing respect. The questions came rapidly. What components do you use? What's your powder charge? How do you achieve that consistency? Frank answered patiently, his voice still quiet. I use mid-range components. I measure carefully. I understand my rifle. I've been doing this for a very long time. But one of the younger shooters, the one who had sneered at Frank's garage junk, pressed harder. There has to be more to it. Nobody shoots groups like that with budget components. Frank was silent for a moment, his sad eyes distant. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather case. Inside were his dog tags, United States Marine Corps. Below his name and service number were the words, Distinguished Marksman, Rifle Instructor, Sniper School. The atmosphere changed instantly. The younger shooter's face went pale. You were a Marine marksmanship instructor? Frank nodded slowly. 26 years. Trained scout snipers. Wrote training manuals on ammunition selection and ballistic optimization. Competed internationally for the Marine Corps shooting team. After I retired, I kept reloading because I enjoyed it. Because I understood it. Because precision isn't about how much money you spend. It's about how much you understand. Another voice came from behind the crowd. I thought that was you, Gunny. An older man pushed through wearing a Staff Sergeant's Association jacket. Frank turned, recognition flickering across his serious face. The man continued. Staff Sergeant Martinez, you trained me in 1991 at Pendleton. You taught me everything I know about reading wind and understanding ballistics. I went on to shoot competitively for 8 years because of what you taught me. Frank's expression softened slightly. Martinez. I remember. You had a natural feel for wind calls. Martinez turned to the crowd. Gunnery Sergeant Frank Morrison is a legend in Marine Corps marksmanship. He held records that stood for 15 years. He trained some of the best snipers who served in 2 wars. If he's shooting 2-inch groups at 800 yards with hand loads, it's because he understands ammunition better than the engineers who design the expensive stuff. The range officer approached, carrying the first-place trophy in an envelope containing the $5,000 prize. He extended his hand to Frank, his grip firm and respectful. Sir, that was the finest shooting I've seen in 20 years of running this competition. Frank accepted the handshake, the trophy, the envelope. Thank you. But his attention was on the younger shooters now gathering closer, their earlier mockery completely gone, replaced by genuine interest. The man who had bragged about his expensive European ammunition spoke up, his voice humble now. Would you be willing to teach us about reloading, about what really matters in precision shooting? Frank considered this. The range was silent, waiting. Finally he nodded. I could do that. I have the time, and the knowledge shouldn't be lost. The range owner, who had been watching from the observation deck, came down. Mr. Morrison, Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, I'd like to offer you free range time. And perhaps you could run a clinic here once a month. Share your expertise. We've gotten too focused on equipment and not enough on fundamentals. Frank's sad, serious expression remained, but there was something different in his eyes now. Purpose, perhaps. Connection. I'd be honoured. Over the following weeks, Frank became a regular presence at the range. His monthly clinics filled immediately, shooters eager to learn from someone who understood the science and art of precision, shooting at a fundamental level. He taught them about barrel harmonics, about how temperature affected powder burn rates, about the subtle differences in bullet construction that charts and advertisements never captured. He showed them how to reload ammunition with precision and consistency, how to test and refine loads for their specific rifles, how to achieve accuracy that rivaled or exceeded the most expensive factory ammunition at a fraction of the cost. The younger shooters who had mocked him became his most dedicated students. The man with the European ammunition, whose name was David, became almost a protege, spending hours at Frank's garage reloading bench, learning the craft. David later admitted that he had spent over $30,000 on ammunition in the past 5 years, chasing precision he could have achieved for a few $100s if he had understood the fundamentals. The range began attracting a different kind of shooter, less focus on expensive equipment, more focus on skill development. Frank's influence spread beyond that single range as his students competed elsewhere and shared what they had learned. The competition organisers created a new category the following year, the Craftsman Division, for shooters using hand-loaded ammunition. Frank was asked to judge it. The entry fees for that division were donated to a fund that provided reloading equipment and training to young shooters who couldn't afford expensive factory ammunition. Frank's $5,000 prize money became the seed money for that fund. Within 2 years, the Craftsman Division was more popular than the Open Division. Shooters discovered that the challenge of crafting their own precision ammunition, of understanding the science behind it, was more rewarding than simply buying the most expensive option available. Frank continued to shoot in competitions occasionally, always with his hand-loaded $12 ammunition, always with his ancient rifle, always wearing his faded red jacket. He won more often than not, but more importantly, he had rebuilt a community around skill and knowledge rather than wealth and equipment. The young shooters who had once mocked him now greeted him with genuine respect, calling him Gunny, asking his advice, sharing their own discoveries and innovations. On the anniversary of that first competition, the range held a special ceremony. They unveiled a plaque in the clubhouse. It read, "Precision comes from understanding, not expense. Skill matters more than money. Knowledge is the finest ammunition." In honour of Gunnery Sergeant Frank Morrison, USMC retired, who reminded us what marksmanship is really about. Frank stood before that plaque in his red jacket, his white beard neatly trimmed, his expression still sad and serious, but his eyes showing something that might have been satisfaction. Around him were dozens of shooters he had trained, from teenagers just learning the craft to experienced competitors who had refined their skills under his guidance. They had all learned the same lesson. That true precision comes from understanding your equipment, your ammunition, your environment. That an old man with hand-loaded rounds crafted in a garage could outshoot the most expensive ammunition available, not through luck, but through decades of knowledge and practice. That respect should be earned through skill and character, not purchased with expensive equipment. Frank had silenced the range that day not with money or status, but with the quiet demonstration of a lifetime of expertise. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone watching that the most valuable things in any craft cannot be bought, only learned, practiced, and earned through dedication and time.